The missile Russia launched wasn't just about Ukraine. It was about who was watching. In a single overnight strike, Moscow used its newest hypersonic weapon in western Ukraine, just miles from European Union and NATO territory. Officially, the Kremlin framed it as retaliation. Kyiv and Western officials rejected that explanation outright. But the location, the timing, and the weapon itself suggest a very different message. Because this missile wasn't designed to win a battle. It was designed to be noticed. And to understand why this launch matters far beyond the impact site, you need to look at what the Oreshnik missile represents and why it appeared now. Russia confirmed that its military fired an Oreshnik intermediate-range ballistic missile during a large-scale overnight attack on Ukraine. Ukrainian officials acknowledged the strike, saying it hit western regions of the country near the EU border. According to publicly available information, this was only the second known combat use of the Oreshnik since it was first revealed in late 2024. Moscow claimed the launch was a response to an alleged Ukrainian drone incident involving a Russian presidential residence. Ukrainian officials, as well as U.S. authorities, dismissed that claim as unfounded. Kyiv described the justification as absurd, arguing that the strike had little to do with retaliation and far more to do with signaling. And that signal was difficult to ignore. The missile reportedly landed in Ukraine's Lviv region, an area close to NATO territory and a critical logistical corridor for Western assistance. Ukrainian security services later released images they said showed fragments of the missile recovered from the area. While the full extent of the damage remains unclear, local officials confirmed that critical infrastructure was affected. Unverified reports circulating online suggested the strike may have targeted an underground energy facility, though authorities have not publicly confirmed that detail. What stood out was not just where the missile landed, but what kind of missile it was. The Oreshnik is described by Russia as a hypersonic intermediate-range ballistic missile capable of carrying either conventional or nuclear warheads. President Vladimir Putin has claimed the missile travels at speeds exceeding Mach 10 and cannot be intercepted by existing air defense systems. Western analysts have urged caution regarding those claims, noting that while the missile is fast and difficult to counter, its real-world performance remains only partially understood. Defense officials. The Oreshnik appears to be based on technology derived from Russia's RSS-26 Rubasia missile program. What makes this weapon particularly destabilizing is not only its speed, but its ambiguity. There is no reliable way to determine whether an incoming Oreshnik missile is carrying a nuclear or a conventional payload until after impact. That uncertainty alone significantly raises the stakes surrounding its use. Early assessments suggest the missile used in this strike carried inert or dummy warheads, indicating the launch was likely symbolic rather than intended to maximize destruction. But in geopolitics, symbolism can be just as powerful as force. The timing of the launch is critical. Just days earlier, Ukraine's European allies announced progress toward potential post-war security guarantees. Britain and France publicly acknowledged discussions about deploying troops to Ukraine after a future peace agreement, a proposal Russia has repeatedly rejected. Moscow has warned it would consider any foreign forces stationed in Ukraine as legitimate targets. Russian officials described such plans as a direct threat, casting further doubt on near-term prospects for a negotiated settlement. Against that backdrop, the Oreshnik launch appears less like an isolated military action and more like a calculated message. European Union Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas described the missile strike as a clear escalation and said it was intended as a warning to both Europe and the United States. She urged EU member states to accelerate air defense deliveries and increase economic pressure on Moscow. Several analysts noted that firing a strategic capable missile so close to NATO territory demonstrated how quickly the conflict could expand without actually crossing that line. A reminder, rather than an attack. To understand why the launch triggered such concern, it helps to look beyond the battlefield and into strategy. Russia has used drones and cruise missiles extensively during the war, but the Oreshnik sits in a different category. It has the range to reach much of Europe, the speed to challenge defenses, and the flexibility to carry different types of payloads. That combination gives Moscow a tool that operates in a gray zone, powerful enough to intimidate, without automatically triggering direct confrontation. Intermediate-range missiles like the Oreshnik were once limited by arms control agreements that no longer exist. Their reappearance reflects a shift toward deterrence through uncertainty rather than overwhelming force. In this case, Russian officials highlighted the missile's speed and power, while Ukrainian and Western sources emphasized the apparent use of inert warheads. Both narratives can exist at the same time, and that duality is central to the message. The launch demonstrated capability without forcing an immediate response. The strike's reported proximity to supply routes linking Ukraine to Poland added another layer of meaning. Those routes are widely known as essential for humanitarian and logistical support. By choosing this area, Russia avoided NATO territory while still placing the alliance uncomfortably close to the event. Some Russian commentators framed the strike as a warning against European troop deployments after a ceasefire. Moscow has consistently said it would not accept such forces under any circumstances. At the same time, Ukrainian officials reported widespread infrastructure damage during the broader overnight attacks, including disruptions to power and heating in Kyiv amid winter conditions. Authorities confirmed casualties but avoided speculative statements while recovery efforts continued. The humanitarian impact was real, but the strategic message was aimed far beyond Ukraine. Military analysts increasingly describe the Oreshnik as a psychological instrument rather than a frontline weapon. Its use sends a signal not only to Ukraine, but to policymakers in European capitals and Washington. The logic is straightforward. If such a missile can be launched conventionally today, uncertainty surrounds how it might be used tomorrow. Russian officials have framed the weapon as a response to Western military support for Ukraine, particularly long-range systems. Western governments reject that framing, arguing that Moscow is using escalation to shape diplomatic negotiations. Public condemnations followed, but without direct retaliation. That restraint may have been anticipated. The strike occurred as U.S.-led efforts to explore potential pathways toward ending the war entered a sensitive phase. Multiple sides suggested talks were ongoing, even as conditions on the ground remained volatile. Russia has said it supports negotiations, but only on terms reflecting what it calls current realities. Ukraine and its allies insist that any settlement must preserve Ukrainian sovereignty and security. By introducing the Oreshnik at this moment, Moscow may be signaling its intention to negotiate from a position of strength without committing to irreversible escalation. For now, there is no indication that the Oreshnik will be used routinely. Its rarity is part of its impact. Each launch forces reassessment, analysis, and caution far beyond Ukraine's borders. Ukraine has called for urgent international consultations. European leaders are weighing their options, and analysts are watching closely to see whether this was a single message or the beginning of a new pattern. Because the real issue is no longer just about one missile. It's about whether strategic weapons are becoming a new language of diplomacy, one built not on words, but on carefully calculated displays of capability. This launch didn't change the map overnight, but it may have changed the conversation. When weapons designed for deterrence appear in regional conflicts, they force everyone involved to think several steps ahead about red lines, escalation, and how peace is pursued when pressure replaces persuasion. And that may be the most important signal of all.